Commissioner Conaway is in attendance.
Conaway.
Present.
Working.
I don't see you if you're present.
I'm here.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Delaware Public Service Commission meeting of July 2nd, 2025. It's nice to see you all here. And we have the reading of the meeting minutes of June 18th. Does anyone have any changes or corrections to those meeting minutes?
Move that we adopt the corrected meeting minutes.
I second the motion.
Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. Commissioner Conaway.
Aye.
Commissioner Correa.
Aye.
Commissioner Drexler.
Aye.
Commissioner Gray.
Aye.
I vote aye. The motion carries. We have public comment at this time on the agenda. Is there anyone here from the public that wishes to make any comment to the Public Service Commission? I don't see a movement to the front or any hands in the air, so I assume that we don't have any public comments. Is there anyone here that wishes to make public comment on the item that's on the agenda and thinks that they may have that opportunity when the item comes up on the agenda? If you have that thought in mind, you will not have that opportunity, so I welcome you to speak now. Is there anyone who wants to make a comment on the agenda? Nobody's responding, so. Okay, we have the consent agenda. Does anyone have any item on the consent agenda they wish to remove to the regular agenda?
I move that we adopt the consent agenda as presented.
I second.
Is there any discussion on that motion? Hearing none. Commissioner Conaway.
Aye.
Commissioner Correa.
Aye.
Commissioner Drexler.
Aye.
Commissioner Gray.
Aye.
I vote aye. The motion carries. The regular agenda, there was number 1 and number 2. I assume that there's no objection that we handle them basically together. Record should reflect that the quiet has come over the agenda item, and I just assume that the answer to that is yes. So we have in the matter of the petition of Chaberton Solar Chestnut Holdings LLC, et cetera, and also the application of Chaberton Solar Sawtooth Holdings LLC for a waiver of the co-location restriction found in the PSC's administrative rules, and we welcome the applicants. Mr. Wallace, please introduce yourself and proceed.
Good morning, Chairman. Eric Wallace with the law firm Green Herlocker on behalf of the Chestnut and Sawtooth applicants. I'm joined today by Ryan Boswell, who's the Vice President of Development for Chaberton, the parent company of these entities, as well as Paige Ober, who's the Director of Development. Their team has been working on this group of projects for several years now. We filed these petitions for waiver as a last resort. In the petitions, we laid out the good cause grounds for granting these waivers. these projects will not be able to move forward absent a waiver. And so the question before the commission today is, do we want to proceed with up to 16 megawatts of capacity across the Chaberton, Chestnut, and Sawtooth projects, or do we want to remove all those projects from the queue and proceed without any of them, right? So they won't be. The initial plan with these projects was to have two 4-megawatt projects, one Chestnut project and one Sawtooth project. But when the results came back from Delmarva Power after they studied the project, they identified that there is capacity on the Clayton substation. There's one project that's ahead of them that applied back in November of 2021 at the very start of application for the program. These projects applied in March of 2023. No other projects have applied behind them, and there's no indication that any others are coming. I think that's a critical piece to understand as you're thinking about the facts before the commission. The key challenge is, while there is some capacity at the substation, there is not capacity, there's not feeder capacity for the line to get into the substation to access that capacity. And so what that means is that the Sawtooth and Chestnut projects would need to build an express feeder to hook into the substation to access that substation capacity that's sitting there, and to the tune of $13 million. That is not a sum of cost that can be borne by two projects. It is a sum of costs that we are hoping we will be able to manage across the entire group of these projects, which are located nearby. And so we're asking the commission to approve the waiver so that each of the individual projects will meet all of the statutory requirements, including the 4-megawatt limit on each individual project. The barrier we've run into here is that in the commission's regulations, it does not allow for co-located projects with two 4-megawatt projects on a site, unless the commission grants the waiver we're requesting here. You may recall that we were here last year for the Blacktail projects. That was a similar situation. In that case, the kind of cost driver that we were working to overcome was the cost to cover the refuse ponds at the water treatment plant. And so we were working closely with the county and had gotten site control and permission for them to do that, and they were very supportive of that initiative. Here we don't have refuse plans. We have a site that I think that one of the really compelling facts here is that the Chaberton team, Ryan and Paige and their team have sort of gone through an engineering study to reconfigure the site. We made a filing yesterday with some additional site plans and metrics that their engineering team put together that showed how they would reconfigure the existing site layout, condensing things to be able to put additional capacity on those sites. Ultimately, we may not be able to get to the full 16 megawatts that we're requesting up to here. It may be something less. We won't know that for sure until Delmarva studies the additional two projects. So two projects have been studied. They've already identified the feeder issue is, we can't get around it. We're going to have to pay for the feeder. Then the question will be, when they study the additional projects, what additional, how much capacity will we be able to use at the substation? There have been some recent developments with the Delmarva team. They made some changes last fall to their technical interconnection requirements that have provided more flexibility. That some of those changes may help to get more capacity here. It won't eliminate the need for the express feeder, though. And as you may be aware, there's an ongoing proceeding to look at the interconnection challenges that community energy facilities are facing since the program launched back in 2021. I believe we have the first projects online earlier this year, and more are coming online this year, but it has been a slow rollout. This is an opportunity through this waiver to either enable up to 16 more megawatts of projects to come forward. In our filing, we laid out the benefits that those projects will bring, including millions of dollars of local tax revenue, And, there's a whole kind of pipeline of folks in and outside of Delaware that will contribute to these projects, from Ryan and Paige and their team that have been working on these projects for the last couple of years to bring them to this point, that have been designing the projects, coordinating with Delmarva on interconnection, studying the projects, working through those challenges as best we can. There are, when the projects, assuming we can move forward, that the commission gives us the opportunity to do that today, the next tranche of the other two projects will apply for interconnection. We'll go through that process, coordinate with the Delmarva engineers to review those projects, and ultimately enter into an interconnection agreement that will allow for the construction of those projects. We'll also need to continue working with the county on site plan review and getting final approvals for the revised configuration that we've been working on and that we included in the filing yesterday. There's also, once we get to those steps, the projects will also need, the Chaperton team will look to find financial backers and investors to put forward the money to build these projects. They will go through the procurement for the materials. Those will be delivered by truck drivers to sites in Delaware, where they'll be stored in warehouses. They'll ultimately deliver to the site. Construction teams will come out, and construction workers will build these projects. They will prepare the site, install the trenching, mount the, install the racking and the panels. The electricians will hook everything up, and inspectors will come inspect the sites. The $13 million towards Delmarva will go to paying a construction team to come out and permit and build the express feeders that will be necessary to connect these sites up to the substation. So there's a massive impact to this group of projects. If the commission denies the request, those benefits will be lost. And so there's a few points in staff's comments that were filed that we'd like to respond to. The first is on page 5, they note that the legislative intent of SB2 was to minimize the size of community energy facilities. Allowing co-location of projects would circumvent that intent. We respectfully disagree. I mean, the primary intent of SB2 was to facilitate community energy development and remove barriers. And that's right in the description of the legislation. The lack of circuit capacity requires an express feeder. That is a problem that any other developer that were to come along would face, and there's no path around that. So, it's not a question of, do we allow co-location or do we prohibit it and assume that the same amount of community energy facility projects will proceed. It's a question of all or none, and that's really critical as the commission is considering this request today. The other key thing is that we are going to be keeping the footprint of the projects within the existing approved limit of disturbance area at the sites, right? So in the same area, we're going to be able to add additional capacity through the redesign and the reconfiguration that the Chaperton team has done. The legislature included a 4 megawatt per project cap in the legislation, but there is no language in there that speaks to or prohibits co-location. And this is not a novel concept. In Maryland, there are rules that allow for co-location. Up to 14 megawatts of 2 megawatt projects can co-locate before you need a CPCN from the commission. And then with a CPCN, you can go beyond that. So every market that has a community solar program has some kind of framework around co-location. In Maryland, they've chosen to enable it, particularly for certain types of preferred sites, because these kinds of interconnection challenges are not unique to Delaware, and this waiver is a path beyond to overcome that challenge. On page 5 of the staff comments, staff notes that the staff agrees that the development and construction of more solar and more community energy facilities will advance Delaware's clean energy policy goals. This is the critical issue before the commission today. There's no question among any of the folks that filed comments that approving these projects and allowing for these community energy facilities to move forward will advance Delaware's clean energy policy goals. Denying the waiver would be contrary to the goals, losing out on private investment in clean, renewable energy that benefits the Delmarva distribution system. Denying it would lead to increased reliance on out-of-state generation increased PJM transmission capacity costs, loss of renewable energy credits from in-state solar, and most importantly, increased costs to Delmarva ratepayers, including low-income customers that will not be able to subscribe to these projects and lower their electricity bills through their community solar subscriptions. Staff acknowledges the $145 in annual savings for the approximately 2,200 Delmarva ratepayers that would be able to subscribe. And the statute requires that at least 15% of the subscribers be low-income customers, which is about 330 folks that would be able to subscribe to each of these facilities. Continuing on page 6 of staff's comments, I think the primary critique or concern that staff has is that allowing the 4 projects would take the available capacity at the Clayton substation, preventing other community energy facilities from accessing that capacity. And they describe it as a monopoly over the substation, giving them an advantage over any other companies. The facts of the matter is, we didn't set out to build 16 megawatts of capacity on the Clayton substation, right? The intent was to build 8 megawatts across these 2 projects, but the issue with the lack of feeder capacity means that the only path forward where these projects will be financially viable is if we can use additional capacity. If the waiver is denied and these projects are canceled, that feeder will not be built. That capacity will remain available at the substation, but there won't be any way for another developer to access it without building their own express feeder. And then they'll face the same challenges that we're discussing here today that the Chatham team is trying to overcome and has been working to overcome since these projects applied for interconnection back in March of 2023. This is not, I think it's also important to note that no other developer has commented on our filing. No one else has applied to the queue. At any time during the last 2 years, more than 2 years now, anybody that wanted to apply to the interconnection queue could have, right? And we haven't seen that happen. And so the expectation that if the waivers are denied, that another developer will come along and be able to move forward with community energy facilities, I think is mistaken. The facts and what we've seen happen in the queue to date, and what we know about the need for the Chatham team to invest $13 million for this express feeder, should indicate to the commission that this is a challenge we're working to overcome, and that the waiver that we're requesting is a reasonable measure to overcome that challenge and enable this development. There was also some questions in staff's comments about how we would add the additional capacity to the existing sites. In our filing yesterday with the revised site plans, we endeavored to show kind of how that would be configured. And really what it means is that we're kind of condensing the rows of panels, and we are using fixed access tracker technology to make those panels more efficient. So we're able to use more solar on less space. On pages 6 and 7 of staff's comments, they talk about the available capacity at the Clayton substation. I touched on this briefly, so I won't linger on it. But when Delmarva reviews these additional projects, it may be that we won't be able to use the full 16 megawatts. We're going to try to do as much as we can and work with Delmarva to be as efficient as possible and utilize as much of the express feeder capacity and the substation capacity to bring community solar benefits to subscribers here in Delaware. But ultimately, the final number will depend on the final site plan and the various kind of interconnection requirements and constraints that we may face as we work through those issues with Delmarva over the next year or so. Finally, on page 7 of staff's comments, they conclude that the high cost of interconnection is not sufficient to justify a waiver. On this point, we respectfully disagree because of the particular challenges with the express feeder and accessing the capacity of the substation. So even if we only moved forward with 8 megawatts on the express feeder, any other developer that came along and wanted to use any of the remaining capacity at the substation, they'd be in the same boat, right? They would need to build an express feeder to be able to access that capacity. And, you know, like our projects, it would be prohibitively expensive for them to do that for what would be less than 8 megawatts likely at that point, or in best case scenario, 8 megawatts. So, you know, rather than reject these waivers and hope that another developer comes along that will pay $13 million to interconnect a 4 megawatt project, the commission should grant the waivers and provide a path forward for these projects that will undisputedly advance Delaware's clean energy goals. There's no dispute that all 4 of these community energy facilities would satisfy the 4 megawatt limit for each interconnection. Nothing in the statute prohibits co-location, and co-location is not a novel arrangement, as we talked about. This is a tool that can be used to overcome interconnection challenges like we're facing here with these projects today. And by granting the waiver, the commission will advance the overarching goal of Senate Bill 2, which was helping to lower the cost of energy and accelerate the adoption of community solar. There's no dispute that the commission has the authority to grant the waiver, and that doing so would advance Delaware's clean energy policy. So for all those reasons, we ask that the commission approve the waivers and give us a chance to move forward with these projects, continue to work with Delmarva, work through the siting and permitting challenges to be able to bring these projects online in the near term to serve Delaware customers and provide those bill savings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Workman?
Mr. Chairman, before Ms. Workman, I would have a request. Apparently, there was a letter from the State Energy Office, which unfortunately I have not seen. Does anyone on staff have a printout of that, or can you get a printout of that while this matter is here? Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. Sorry for the interruption, Mr. Chair.
Bob?
I was going to begin my comments with kind of summarizing DENREC's letter. I'm not going to be able to answer any questions about it. The State Energy Office, DENREC State Energy Office, they have someone here. I was told Scott Hunter is here from the State Energy Office who is going to be able to answer questions if you have them. But I just want to take a quick minute to summarize what they wrote. DENREC states that the waiver request is, quote, squarely inconsistent with the statutory language, end quote. Their position is that the company's characterization of the proposal as 2 projects seeking to co-locate is false and is simply the company seeking to circumvent the statute by building a facility over 4 megawatts. DENREC also pointed out the considerable stakeholder engagement on the bill, which is the statute that we're dealing with now, that was passed, and that the 4 megawatt cap was put there on purpose to balance concerns among the stakeholders. DENREC ends their letter with the assertion that the waiver request is, quote, so clearly at odds with the law we work to enact, end quote. That's just a summary of DENREC's position. And if the commission has any questions, I think Scott Hunter from their office would be able to answer them for you. All right, moving on. Whatever the chair would like to do.
I'd like you to proceed. We'll do all the arguments and then we'll get to questions. That way everybody can respond.
All right, sounds good. Staff opposes the waiver petition. Mr. Wallace presented the question as one of, do you want to ban these solar projects? That's absolutely not the question that the commission needs to answer today. The question the commission needs to answer: is there good cause such that the petitioners should get special treatment under the rules of general applicability? So there are rules that the commission has set. The commission is bound by those rules. There is a rule that allows a waiver to happen for good cause, and as long as the waiver would not be inconsistent with the purpose of the regulations, inconsistent with the statute, or inconsistent with consumer protection laws. So in order for the commission to grant that waiver, you all have to find, 1, good cause exists, 2, the waiver is consistent with the purposes of the regulations. 3, the waiver is consistent with the statute. And 4, the waiver is consistent with consumer protection laws. Staff's position is that they cannot meet those goals. Obviously, we in Delaware have clean energy goals we want to get to. However, the commission is bound by their own rules and the statute in order to get there. And staff's position is that this is not a good enough reason for the commission to waive their own rules. It's circumventing the statute somewhat. So I'm going to kind of go through those one by one. First, I want to start with good cause. What is good cause? Good cause, depending on what area of law you're in, has any number of definitions. However, in the administrative law context that we're in right now, the Supreme Court of Delaware decided in the 2014 case Camtech School of Nursing versus Delaware Board of Nursing that when nothing in the plain language of the statute or regulation requires the board or commission to define good cause, then the board or commission is, quote, free to decide what conduct is demonstrative of good cause, even on a case-by-case basis, end quote. So deciding what is or is not good cause is very much in the realm of the commission's discretion. As long as that determination is reasonable, it's not off the wall, arbitrary, and capricious. It has to be reasonable, but the discretion rests with you to decide what is good cause. Now, I posit to the commission that we need to look at this issue as one of general applicability of the rules. So generally, applicable rules generally apply to all. Everyone has to follow the same rules. And generally applicable rules govern generally applicable problems. The purpose of the waiver is that there's recognition that sometimes there are special circumstances that require special treatment. Now, since the co-location regulations are in the regulations, they're generally applicable and apply to everyone equally. Good cause must require the commission to ask what's special about the petitioner's circumstances that mean they get special treatment so the co-location rules don't apply to them. The commission heard the company's reasons that they believe they have good cause to get a waiver from the commission, but none of their reasons are special circumstances to them. They're all generally applicable. All the benefits that would happen are generally applicable. Every community energy facility that has to be built is going to help Delaware achieve their energy goals. Every community energy facility that's built is going to bring work to the area. It's going to have all the positive economic things Mr. Wallace was talking about. But that's not special. Every single community energy facility that is built has those benefits. Now, the main reason they're requesting the waiver is because of the interconnection cost. The interconnection cost is high, and they need to spread that out over their different projects. But the company is not the only company with high interconnection costs. The costs of interconnection are such a ubiquitous problem that are affecting every community energy facility that staff has had to open a whole docket just to deal with the complaints about it. And that docket number is 24-1012. And it's something that staff's working on with Delmarva, the community energy facilities are working on together to try to get these interconnection costs down. But it's a problem that all of them are having. Additionally, in anticipation of the commission's decision today on this waiver request, at least 4 other community energy facilities have reached out to Tricia and her team about filing their own waiver request out of concern that granting a waiver request today would give a competitive advantage to one of their competitors, and because they would also like to build bigger facilities and spread out their costs more. High interconnection costs are not a reason to waive this generally applicable rule because high interconnection costs are a generally applicable problem. Now, even if a company was alone in their complaints about high interconnection costs, that still doesn't give them good cause to get a waiver because of the wording of the statute. The statute explicitly says all costs associated with interconnection are the responsibility of the community-owned energy facility in the same sentence that they put the 4 megawatt cap. So you have a 4 megawatt cap, and the community energy facility is the one who has to bear that cost. Legislative history sheds a little more light on that. at the Energy Stakeholder Forum in 2021 to create the existing statutory framework, the industry representative commented that developers understand interconnection costs may be high, but the onus is on the developer to determine the viability of the project. The solution to high interconnection costs contemplated by the legislature at the time of drafting was not to waive any rules to build bigger, to build more. The solution is to recognize the unviability of a project and to move on. Now, it's clear in both the statute itself and the legislative history that cost by itself is not a good enough reason to circumvent the legislature's 4-megawatt cap on CEFs. Now, Mr. Wallace does point out this is a co-location, so there's two on the same property. DENREC asked the question of the commission in their letter, what's the difference if it's 2 4 megawatts versus 1 8 megawatt? I don't know. What is the difference? It's on one piece of property. It's going to look like one facility. So I think that's a valid question. Now, if the commission grants this waiver, they wouldn't essentially be subverting the 4-megawatt intent of the statute by allowing more to be built when the intent of the legislature was to keep things small. Next, the commission would have to decide if the waiver is consistent with the regulations, the statute, and consumer protection laws. So as I just talked about, staff doesn't believe it's consistent with the statute. They also don't believe it's consistent with the regulations or consumer protection principles because, as Mr. Wallace pointed out, staff is concerned about a monopoly on the Clayton substation. Mr. Wallace said that they didn't set out to create this monopoly, but the end result is the same. Maybe you started out wanting only one facility on each project, total of 8 megawatts, but the end result is the same. No one else will be able to build on that substation. Maybe ever. I don't know. So that would essentially give the parent company a monopoly in a very highly competitive industry. And I know that Mr. Wallace says, well, there is no competition because no one else is trying to build here. I think that is not very relevant to whether or not there's special circumstances here, because there are a lot of substations that nobody is trying to build on. Clayton's not a special circumstance. Some substations are viable, some are not. And that's up to the facility or the community energy facility to decide for themselves. Now, I want to contrast this with the co-location waiver the commission has already granted in 24-0846, which was the Blacktail Holdings docket. So how is that situation different from this one? So I want to go back to my thoughts about generally applicable rules for generally applicable problems. What made Blacktail's situation special, that they got special treatment, and we're saying this company shouldn't get special treatment. The Blacktail waiver began as a request for proposal from Sussex County because the county had to cover their wastewater lagoons. The cost was exorbitant, and that was going to fall entirely on the taxpayer unless the county could find a different solution. Now, the solution the county found was that CEFs could sit on top of the covered wastewater lagoons that would help bear the burden of covering them. So the state or the county had to cover these wastewater lagoons. They had to. They didn't have a choice. It was going to be very expensive. And so in order to shove that expense a little bit on someone else, they requested this waiver so that the companies could put more community energy facilities in less space. Blacktail didn't seek a waiver just to make their project cost effective. They sought a waiver to turn an incredibly expensive required project from the county into something useful for the community. The key difference, I think, turns on the underlying necessity of the circumstances. Sussex County had to cover the wastewater lagoons. They had no choice. The best they could do was turn the legally mandated, expensive project into something useful, something that the waiver made possible. The circumstances surrounding that docket are unique. They're not generally applicable. Now compare that to the present petition, which is seeking this cost waiver for something that's applicable to every community energy facility. There's no underlying reason that we need to have a community energy facility other than what was already contemplated in the statute, in the regulations. Additionally, one of the concerns is that there's going to be a lack of competition if the company is allowed to co-locate. In the Blacktail project, competition was protected because of the state's request for proposal procedures that had to happen, in which qualified vendors could all bid, and then the county picked which one they liked the best. So any guardrails that the request for proposal offered in that case are not offered in this case. There is no competition that would be allowed to happen. I want to point out that the commission's decision on this is going to set a precedent for how the commission should deal with waiver requests. The commission can grant the waiver request for reasons stated by Mr. Wallace, but when someone else comes in to request a waiver, they're going to have to give the same consideration. And if the commission is willing to give a waiver for every generally applicable problem, then what's the point of the rules? If everyone can come in and get a waiver for it, that's giving a competitive advantage to those who are technically sophisticated enough to bring something to the commission, can afford legal representation to bring something to the commission. So the company's reasons to waive the co-location rules are not compelling. They don't rise to the level of good cause. There are no special circumstances that exist, like in the Blacktail docket, to justify a waiver. And then granting a waiver request because of high interconnection costs clearly undermines the intent of the statute and would open the door for more companies to cite high interconnection costs as a reason to build large facilities and call it co-location. The correct avenue to address this issue is through the legislature, through regulation changes. And I know that the Public Service Commission staff are working on amendments to the community energy facility regulations. I don't know what those look like yet, but I know it's in the process because the process we have isn't working very well. And so we're working on making those changes, but right now we're bound by the rules that we have. For those reasons, staff respectfully recommends that the commission deny the applicant's petition for a waiver of the co-location rules. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Burke. Mr. Crumpler?
The DPA essentially echoes the staff's position. I believe the public advocate, Mr. Jameson Tweedy, has some comments that he'd like to make.
Thank you, Davey. I just want, I agree with staff's position. And the couple comments I wanted to make are that I appreciate the creativity that seems like Chamberton is bringing to this problem. To my mind, the 4 megawatts size and the point that Ms. Workman made about costs is very clearly part of the statute, and it's very clear in it. So granting this waiver is not clearly consistent with the statute. And it's clearly at odds with commission regulations. I think it is true that if this waiver were granted, you would see many other companies that would want similar waivers. And so I think that's a very relevant thing for the commission to consider. And if we were to grant this, it would be DPA's position that it should be through some clear set of rule changes that apply to everyone. I also wanted to say, though, that I'm very mindful of the need for new generation. I'm very mindful of the need for new generation that meets our state's renewable energy goals. And so this is a problem that we definitely need to solve, and we need to solve creatively and potentially quickly, especially as federal policy is changing. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Mr. Wallace?
Chairman, just to briefly respond, I think the public advocate hit the nail on the head. This is a problem that needs to be resolved. It needs to be resolved quickly. My understanding is that, across Delaware, capacity is limited, right? So there's a project ahead of these projects at the Clayton substation. They didn't have to build an express feeder. They currently have a monopoly on the capacity, in Ms. Workman's phrasing, of the capacity there, right? So the question is, are you going to allow them to keep the monopoly, or are you going to provide a path forward for for these projects? And frankly, if there are other projects in a similar situation, the commission should look at that as well. Time is of the essence. We've all been hearing in the news about the changes to federal tax policy that will limit the economics of solar going forward and make it that much harder for projects to shoulder very large interconnection costs. We have an opportunity here with these projects that have already been studied by Delmarva. They have their study results back. They're ready to move forward while the other ones come along. Delmarva is already familiar with these sites. We're hopeful that they will be able to expedite the review of those projects, and that we have an opportunity potentially to get these projects online as quickly as possible, and hopefully before any changes to federal tax policy would make these projects uneconomic, even with the waiver request. And so I agree that it would be good for the commission to take a holistic look at this issue, look at rule changes to facilitate interconnection going forward. But in the interim, we can't wait. These projects, we can't start all over again in 12 months or 6 months, or we need to move forward if we want to have a chance for these projects to proceed. And federal changes in federal law could create headwinds that ultimately mean that these projects won't be successful, but we won't even have a chance if we can't get a waiver today so that we can try. And to the extent that there are other developers that are behind another project at a substation and face similar situation where they need to build an express feeder and it's going to cost them $10, $12, $13 million, and they want to come in and request a waiver, I would hope that the commission would take a close look at that as well, and look for ways, as SB2 directed, to enable community energy facility development rather than to restrain it and prevent it. This is a major challenge. The Chabron team has worked hard with their engineers and in coordination with Delmarva to come up with a solution that they could bring you today in the context of this waiver. And the bottom line is that granting the waiver means that these projects move forward and have a chance at succeeding. Denying the waiver means that these projects go away, and the 1 4-megawatt project that has a position on the Clayton substation will be the only project, and anybody else that tries to come along later will have an even harder time of it than the Chabron team, because interconnection costs go up every year. And federal tax policy is looking like it is going to make it much more challenging in the next 2, 3, 4 years. These projects have already been in the queue since March of 2023. It's taken them over 2 years to get to this point. So even if someone were to apply today and were to have the ability somehow magically to shoulder these interconnection costs, the connection costs are likely to be higher, and they're likely not to have the same opportunity, at least for federal investment tax credits to help defray some of that cost. So we're happy to answer any questions the commissioners may have, but we really very strongly encourage the commission to consider the big picture for these projects and the opportunity that these waivers present for additional community energy facility capacity, and the benefits that will accrue to the state of Delaware, the county, and the subscribers that will have an opportunity to save money on their electric bills if this is granted.
Thank you. Commissioner Conaway, do you have any questions of the parties?
No, sir, thank you.
My other fellow commissioners, questions? Commissioner Gray?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a few questions. I feel both an empathy for the seeking of of a value proposition, it seems, from the developers and a constraint from the statute, the way it's written. But I do have a few questions. Is the need here for a fast feeder due to the site selection of your projects?
The constraint is that the existing feeder does not have capacity. So there's one project ahead of us in the queue. There was feeder capacity for that project. They aren't building an express feeder. The next project in the queue is the first Chaberton project, and that is designated as an express feeder project. There are no other projects in the queue other than these two projects, both of which require an express feeder. So the way to think about it is, that the limiting factor is not the substation capacity, it's the feeder capacity. And this is a solution to resolve the feeder capacity issue by building an express feeder, which is the solution that Delmarva provided to the company in their interconnection study report. And it is the path that they are working to pursue if we can resolve this co-location issue through the waivers.
So a little more clarity. Is it site selection? If it were, for instance, a different site, might not need a fast feeder. And as you contemplate that, it leads me to ask how many 4 megawatt CEFs have been deployed under the current rules?
So it's a bit of a complex response. So, depending on the particular site, the companies work with Delmarva to identify how to interconnect the project most efficiently. That said, the Chaberton team, in selecting a site, also looks at, what the substations are out there, what's available. And so this was a situation where they identified that there was substation capacity. They found sites that were near to the substation. And then when Delmarva studied the project and looked at how it could interconnect, it identified that this is the appropriate substation to connect to, but that as a result of the lack of feeder capacity, this additional express feeder will be required. This is not a unique issue, right? This is something that other projects are going to face because of the issue that we're having, where all of the easy sites have been pursued, and now, if community energy facilities are going to move forward in Delaware from this point, we're going to have to resolve these kinds of challenges so that we can be able to have express feeders where we don't have feeder capacity and we still have substation capacity.
Okay, so it leads me to conclude that there are 4 megawatt CEFs that have been deployed under these rules.
There are. I don't know how many there are. I believe that there are 70 or so companies that have filed preliminary certificates since 2023. As I was looking at the commission's Delafile system for this, I saw it looks like there's maybe 8 or so in each of the last 2 years that have gone through the final certificate process. Of those, I'm aware of one that came online earlier this year. There may be others that have come online since. So I think that there are 4 megawatt projects that have feeder capacity that are moving through the process, but that will not continue as the feeders fill up. We'll continue to run into this situation where there will be substation capacity available, but no way to access that without an express feeder.
Commissioner Gray, I'm sorry, Commissioner Gray, if I could provide some more context, excuse me. To your question about site selection, it is not unique to our site. It's really unique to this area of the state. This site that we're talking about today or the two sites are similarly positioned to 2 other substations of similar size, the Cedar Creek substation and the Townsend substation. Neither of those substations have any capacity for any further CEFs. That's why we're approaching this Clayton substation the way that we are. And to the point about monopolies, the reason those 2 substations don't have capacity is because there are utility scale projects connecting at the distribution level that have consumed all of the capacity at those 2 subs. So yes, it is a siting issue, but it is not unique to this particular site. It's unique to this portion of the state.
Okay, thank you for that. One other comment I guess I would make. Are there any workarounds other than this waiver that represents a value proposition for your development to proceed?
We've been thinking long and hard about how to solve this problem. this waiver basically takes the high cost and spreads it out across more capacity, bringing the effective cost per megawatt of capacity down to a level that we think is viable. Absent some kind of a grant program or some other third-party funding to help defray some of the interconnection cost, or some kind of a change at Delmarva to address that interconnection cost. This is the only path forward that we've been able to identify. And again, as I said at the beginning, this was our last resort to try to save these projects.
No commercial partnering opportunities that provide you the opportunity to joint venture and spread those costs further. Just as a thought. That's not, it's a rhetorical question.
Yeah.
All right. No further questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Mr. Wallace, thank you for your presentation. You mentioned that this request is for up to 16 total megawatts, and but also included the primary, I guess, roadblock to complete this is the fact that you have to build that express line. And so, but you did mention up to 16. Is there a sweet spot where 12 would make it financially viable, but 16 is better? Or does it have to be just under 16? Is there a way this could be financially viable? That's my first question. And then I have a follow-up as well.
I think the answer is that we don't know yet. There's a lot of variables that go into project development. And so there may be something shy of 16 and it may be that as a result of Delmarva's study, they come back and say we can do 14 or we can do 15. And then the development team will have to look at that, look at, the cost of capital to invest in the project, look at the other costs of permitting and development, the costs of equipment, the timelines for these projects, whether the investment tax credits will be available based on their timeline. So there's a whole bunch of variables that go into place. The result of that is that we're asking for up to 16 to provide the greatest opportunity for these projects to succeed. Whether or not they will succeed depends on a whole bunch of different variables. And so I can't give you a bright line number shy of that would do it, because there's so many unknowns at this early stage in the process where Delmarva hasn't even studied these projects. But what we know is that the very first project in the queue, Delmarva has identified this roughly $13 million cost to interconnect. The cost for the subsequent projects is far lower because they're able to use that express feeder that the first project is building. And so, so by taking that high cost and spreading it out over the other, sharing it with all of the other projects that will be able to utilize that facility, that's the path forward that we've identified here.
Thank you. And a follow-up question. So the other two substations have reached full capacity or cannot take on that capacity. So if this project went through, then you'd have 3 substations at full capacity. Does that preclude any rooftop solar from coming on? Are you blocking out and crowding out rooftop solar from neighbors? And have you had any pushback or any comments from neighbors regarding this project?
If I may address that question, generally the rooftop solar projects under 500 kilowatts are treated separately in Delmarva's interconnection study process. So these kinds of limitations at substations are generally confined to projects larger than 500 kW. So I believe the answer is no, we would not be precluding any other rooftop solar.
And I just have one more question. So in the DENREC letter, have you seen the DENREC letter? Okay. So in the paragraph that starts, as for the high interconnection costs, the costs of interconnection are borne by the CEF. We all know that. We all agree on that. Chaberton could consider building out the capacity on either or both parcels as one or more standard merchant generation projects alongside those projects. What does that say to you?
Well, that's not a viable path forward as I understand it. In order to interconnect a merchant generator project, those will need to interconnect at the distribution level, but they'll need to interface with PJM to be able to sell power into the PJM wholesale market. Due to the recent changes in the PJM study procedures late last year, or I guess it was 2 years ago, but they'll need to enter the PJM queue. They'll need to be studied. There's sort of an express path that they can take through that. But there is a major backlog in PJM, and there are.
I understand I'm on OPSI, so.
Yeah. So the bottom line is that that's a major delay, which would mean that these projects it would be much slower to get through that process. And until they are studied and approved by PJM as well as by Delmarva, they wouldn't be financeable. And also just the general value of those projects as merchant generating facilities is lower than if they proceed as community solar facilities, which is why we're pursuing that path.
Thank you. I have no more questions.
Mr. Korea?
Mr. Wallace, during your discussion and presentation, you mentioned millions of dollars of tax revenue. Could you give us an example of what are they?
Certainly.
I'm not asking for exact dollars and different categories, but just general idea that property value, income tax from the wages paid to the workers and engineers and those kind of things.
Yes. So we, in our filing, we laid out some of the different revenue figures for these projects. I'm just looking for where we have it. So for example, the property taxes to be paid to Newcastle County, and this is on page 7 of each of our filings, would be about $4.5 million for these projects. There's also income tax to the state of Delaware that would be to the tune of $8.3 million. We'll also be obviously spending the 13 plus million investing in Delmarva and all the economic activity associated with building out their facilities. Ryan, do you have a sense of additional figures you could provide?
Yeah, the total capital expenditure for the construction of 16 megawatts would be roughly $50 million, and that's direct investment. That doesn't account for any of the ancillary investment through all the workforce development and money spent by those construction employees.
One more question, that all these economic concepts, wages, shortage of energy in Delaware, those concepts are very good in understanding and talking. But the basic issue seems to be that there's a statute and there's a 4 megawatt limit. So, and the staff is working on community solar. So for the rules and regulations. So there is a statute, there are rules and regulations coming up. So if no one else is going to come at this site, suppose we wait for 6 months and find out if the statute is changed and or if the community solar regulations are changed and now it's more viable. I'm not convinced that it is economics is a very good word. We all need money. But statute is something which binds the state, which binds the people, which binds the safety. There are reasons for making that statute. So do you have something not economic, not shortage of, not other non-statute factors, which can convince me that this is worth a waiver?
Yeah, so I think on the statutory interpretation question, right? The language in the statute prohibits each community energy facility to a total of 4 megawatts, right? We are proposing that each of our facilities will be no larger than 4 megawatts, just as the commission approved in the Blacktail waiver. That was a group of co-located 4 megawatt projects. We are fully complying with the statutory size requirement. Right. The issue here is the commission's regulation and the co-location requirement there. So I think big picture, there's nothing in the statute that prohibits the commission from doing this. It's a question for the commission of, is there a good cause here? And is this the direction that the commission wants to go to, look at a barrier like we're facing here, where there isn't an alternative, and to say, in the face of the PJM challenges, and in the face of rising capacity and energy costs, do we want to deny these waivers and unwind the last 2.5 years of work that's been done by the Chabadin team and Delmarva to get these projects to this point, based on a, you know, an interpretation of the statute that when the language doesn't prohibit what we're asking to do, right? Or does the commission want to chart a path forward, help us overcome the barriers to this project, promote clean renewable energy development in the state, provide those savings that will come from that to Delaware customers sooner rather than later, while also enabling these projects to have an opportunity at least to use some of the federal tax benefits that folks in Delaware are paying for, whether or not those benefits accrue to Delaware. Those federal dollars may go to projects in other states that can move more quickly if we decide instead to press pause here and wait for a legislative change or a rulemaking and then try to start again in a few months. So I think at the end of the day, this question is really about, do we want to facilitate these projects moving forward? And is this commission willing to find good cause here based on the challenges that these projects are facing, all of the effort that's gone into finding alternative paths forward, and the very real impacts that this decision will have, which is these projects don't move forward if we don't have a waiver.
If I may offer my most compelling argument, I will say up front, I am not an attorney. And so these statutory arguments, I won't make them as compellingly or as eloquently as Mr. Wallace. But my interpretation of what the statute intended when it sought to prohibit co-location, or not expressly prohibit co-location, but what is generally the intent is to avoid hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of acres of what is really utility scale solar being broken up into 4 megawatt projects and thereby qualifying as community energy facilities. To give you a little bit of background on Chaberton, we have 3 core values: creativity, excellence, and humanity. The opportunity here for us to express our creativity is that we have been challenged to figure out how to absorb these very high interconnection costs without creating utility scale facilities that are required to typically absorb $13 million. So what we've done is we've applied our best engineers to this problem, and they have come up with ways to fit twice the capacity in exactly the same amount of land. We're generating 50% more clean electrons on one site, 70% more clean electrons on the other site, significantly more clean power going to the grid on the exact same amount of land. This isn't an expansion to a utility scale size facility. This is forcing more efficiency. If anything, we should be, I think, falling all over ourselves to get more clean power out of the same or less land. And that's what this opportunity has really presented to us, the opportunity to apply our creativity and figure out how can we offset these costs without expanding our footprint.
Commissioner Correa, if I may. Creativity is not where the law thrives. Right now, the commission is asked to decide whether, on their own admission, these problems that are applying to everyone, they said having a substation or this special feeder that they need at this point in time is applicable to most projects that would need to build. So they would be facing this exact same problem. This high interconnection costs, all these economic benefits, they're going to come from every project. Is that a good enough reason for the commission to say, actually, we don't need to follow our own rules? We set these rules. We don't like them anymore. We don't have to follow them anymore. And I think that this is not the way the commission wants to treat waivers moving forward, because I imagine in the future, Mr. Wallace might not be here. I anticipate being here. Someone else comes in with a waiver request, maybe not even for this regulation, but for another regulation. And they say, oh, well, in 25 -0408 and 0410, you granted a waiver based on good cause that was applicable to everyone. And, I have a good cause that's applicable to everyone. So you need to grant my waiver. And then the commission gets into this problem of having having to justify what was special about this situation versus not granting a waiver when we don't find anything special. There are other avenues the commission can take or the company could take. They could advocate for legislative change. They could advocate for regulation change. And yeah, that's going to take time, but that's the way the law operates. And we do that on purpose so that, like Commissioner Correa said, the law is applying to everyone. The law is fair. The law is well reasoned and sound. And at this point, the commission granting this waiver, from staff's perspective, would be putting their own spin on the legislation, putting their own good intentions, because we want community solar, we want more energy, but we can't allow that to override the rules that we have. That's all. Thank you.
Ms. Workman, you use the term special treatment. I would respectfully submit to you that if this commission were to grant a waiver, it would be fair treatment, not special treatment. And I just think that that's a good point from my perspective anyway. Now, with respect to the issue, one of the issues, for example, if they sold 91% of the business in this particular issue to a third party, it wasn't an affiliate because they own less than 10% of it, this deal would go through. They wouldn't even need a waiver, right?
I can't answer that question. I do not know the answer.
Mr. Tweedy, or I'm sorry, Mr. Crumpler? Well, the reason it's co-location is because it's an affiliate, right?
Well, it's also because it's on one piece of property. So one piece of property is also an issue. Or if they were to subdivide the property, that would also be an issue.
Yeah, because
the co-location rules.
Yeah. And just for the commissioner's sake, there's been sort of a discussion here at the table. There's nothing in the statute, Commissioner Correa. Understand that it's a regulation. And, you know, obviously as a commissioner on this commission, there's a commission rule, Mr. Wallace, and we treat that pretty seriously. Sometimes so seriously we shoot ourselves in the foot. And this might be one of those occasions where we sort of cut off our nose to spite our faces. I mean, it sounds like to me that there's no one else who's going to come in and is going to be able to duplicate what they've done because of the rules. And it sounds like it's probably the most efficient use of the space possible, producing the most clean energy possible, creating millions of dollars worth of benefits to various entities, providing $145 a month to 2,200 of Mr. Tweedy's constituents, providing money to the federal government, the workers' compensation fund, the local store that sells subs to the workers. It's just really sort of, to me, this has been probably the most troublesome case I've ever had in 20 years. It sounds sort of dumb, maybe it's just a little waiver case. But there's so many nuances here. I mean, our staff doesn't know anything about competition. They're not trained in competition. We talk about competition, it probably emanates from the solar community, and they want to have competition. They want to have that sort of stuff, and I recognize that. And what the real problem is this case is what Ms. Workman has put her finger on, which is it's pretty clear that you need a waiver. It's pretty clear that if we give you a waiver, the gates are going to be open and there's going to be waivers galore probably in the queue. So that's the real problem. And I can't think of a way to stop that problem off the top of my head. Let me ask you a couple questions, Mr. Wallace. When does this problem arise to your attention, I mean, to the company's attention about the need for a waiver?
I think it emerged when they got their study results back from DPL and they learned that the only path forward was to pay for the express feeder. And one of the challenges is that those costs have gone up significantly in recent years with DPL. And so my understanding is
your previous comments.
What's that?
I heard your previous comment. So what you're telling me is that the company acted in good faith. They were going to abide by the law and by the regulation. And but for the results of the information from Delmarva, which I understand you can't get before the fact, you have to file an application, correct?
Correct.
Then Delmarva will give you the information, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so there was no way for you to prevent or for you to obtain that information. You have to commit and go for it, so to speak, and then you find out, and then you have this problem, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So, Ms. Workman, isn't the fact that they were, to use probably a poor word, blameless with respect to their concept of what in other words, their intent was to comply with the law, comply with the regulation. But for an unexpected result, apparently from Delmarva, they would have followed through and abided by the law, and everybody would be happy. No waiver would have been necessary. So can't we make an exception in a situation where basically intentionally they were blameless?
I would argue that that would apply to everyone who would come in here trying to get this kind of waiver. The interconnection costs, again, we have a whole docket addressing it. We're working with Delmarva to address it, working with the community energy facilities to try and address it. But I imagine, and I hope this is the case, that every community energy facility that comes into the state of Delaware comes in with the intention of following the law. And then they get this report from Delmarva and they, as the company said, creatively try to look for a solution. I don't think that this is a reason to grant a waiver. Because again, this is something every CEF, I'm hoping, comes in with the intention of following the law, sets up this project to follow the law, and then they get bad information. And what was contemplated at the drafting of the legislation, which I pointed out to you and is in the memo, is that interconnection costs were going to be high. Companies come into this knowing they're going to be high, and that determines the viability of their project. And unfortunately, not all projects are viable. And the legislature seemed to understand that, or at least it was contemplated during the hearings that happened in drafting the bill.
Well, first of all, we created our own problem. It was our regulation to set up this standard and then also gave us the waiver. So I'm looking at myself in the mirror here. I'm blaming myself, basically, nobody else. We're in this conundrum. And from what I understand the facts to be, is that if I were the Winslow Solar Farm LLC, there's no way in heck I would be invested in that area because it wouldn't be economical. And apparently a fairly substantial amount of Delmarva Tower territory sits similarly. It's the same similar situation. So we're going to turn our back on a economic development piece here that considerable work has been put into. It will not be replicated almost certainly by anybody else. And all this benefit that we're referring to, we're going to lose. How does that make sense to me?
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Mr. Graham. I'm getting too emotional on this. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Right. I completely empathize with your rationale. And I don't want to extend this, for an unlimited amount of time, but I would ask those very questions if I could, if there's someone here from the State Energy Office. Inasmuch, could that person please come to the mic for just a few questions? Because I'm sitting here contemplating, I've just read this letter today, and I know that you've listened to most of the testimony here, and I think you see the conundrum that we're trying to resolve. But under these circumstances, if you in the State Energy Office also observe that many of the CEFs are going to be presented with this problem, what resolution moving forward do you envision? And can you discuss some of those alternatives and options with the Commission?
Commissioners, Scott Hunter from the Delaware State Energy Office, acting policy lead here in Time Noises Stead, who is out of the office this week. I've just joined in the last year, so I can't speak great depth to the history of the issue, but I know that the State Energy Office worked with the PSC and stakeholders, solar developers of all ilk, including community solar developers as well as developers of residential and commercial scale systems. And from what I understand in the history and the development of the law, that there was a concern about competition and economies of scale in installation, and a lot of thoughtful work went into developing the 4 megawatt limit. Alternatives would be to develop a solution that is open to everyone. And that's, I think, some of the concern is that the waiver process puts some at a competitive advantage to others. We appreciate the exigent circumstances, with the tax credit changes that are under consideration and the resource adequacy challenges that we have. But believe that a solution needs to be forged that is open to all developers and takes into consideration that balance between residential scale installations and commercial scale installations, and concerns about crowding out on distribution circuits and feeders and substations. So I guess the extent of what I can offer is that our comments are designed to encourage consistency with the statute to the greatest extent possible. I know that won't be satisfactory or feel sufficient.
So if I look from a high level as a state policy, renewable deployment and development is desirable in Delaware, yes?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's a policy that the State Energy Office has embraced.
Okay. This is the first, what I would consider to be significant waiver request that's come in front of the commission. Am I right?
It was the blacktail waiver last year.
Okay, so the second. Mr. Chair, I'm inclined, of course, I have a little bit of a business background, and I know there needs to be a value proposition in order to be somewhat of an incentive for investors to risk their monies in deploying any of these solutions within the state that are aligned with our policies. And I understand the constraints with respect to the rules that we've made in the statutes, although insofar as the statute language is concerned, if each of their deployments on property is 4 megawatts or less, then it seems like it conforms to the statute in that regard. But with respect to it being one parcel, for example, that may be not what was intended by the statute and our rule. But I see every order that comes through the commission says that the commission can revise our thinking, our judgment, and our decision-making. So, Mr. Chair, if you're prepared, I'd like to make a motion that we adopt the waiver. And my rationale, I'll just discuss it briefly. My rationale is that there seems for me to be a need for a solution to the constraints that many developers are going to confront in order for us to successfully adopt and accept the policies for deploying renewables within the state of Delaware. The way the grid is built, the way the real estate is situated, the way the investments will need to be made, they will need to be spread sufficiently over the income or revenue sources in order to make them acceptable and adopted for developers to take that amount of risk. And so I'm prepared to move that we adopt this waiver the way it is submitted.
And I'd like to second that. And my comments are, we did, there was a waiver last year. It was a year ago, for good reason. To defray the cost of covering the refuse ponds, we agreed to a waiver of these rules. I don't know whether the legislature, when it determined a 4 megawatt field was appropriate, a 4 megawatt solar field was appropriate, considered that interconnection costs may be an issue. And you are following the statute in terms of the 4444. We get it. They're close by. We understand. Yeah. And that makes it economical because of the express feeder, which I don't know that they anticipated an interconnection cost of that magnitude, but that's the case. I don't anticipate a wave of other waivers being requested. I don't know that there are other 16 megawatt fields and whether their interconnection costs would be the same. And maybe it is time to change the regulation because of these costs, because of these ever rising costs. I'm seconding the motion.
Guys got ahead of me. I wanted Ms. Workman had another comment to be made. Please.
Yeah, so Tricia gave me some additional information. According to Delmarva updates, 30 projects, and this goes to Commissioner Gray's question earlier, 30 projects will be turned on this year of the 4 megawatt solar facilities. 70 more are in the queue. We started with over 200 projects for the 4 megawatt and 100 have withdrawn. So that goes to show that this non-viability of projects is a recurring issue. And if the commission were to grant this waiver, those, 100 that have withdrawn can come back. And then the commission could potentially be dealing with 100 waiver requests for those.
Well, I'm not going to be ruling on something that's not on the record. You've made a oral argument, but we don't have any evidence on the record with respect to that. And you're looking at a 50% failure rate, which doesn't surprise me given the fact that Delmarva Power and Light has this issue all over the state, but particularly, I believe, in Sussex County. But maybe I might be wrong on that.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
just a comment to Ms. Workman. I think I heard you say earlier that there's a docket evaluating these measures, these factors, these parameters. And so it's my hope that the convergence of and the completion of that docket is going to bring some insight and value to solving this in a much more uniform way moving forward.
Chairman Winslow, if I could interrupt, if we could just clarify which orders the commission's referring to in the motion, that would be helpful to Ms. Bieniek.
So
Orders in number 1 and 2 of the.
I have moved that we grant the petition using order number 10755 and that we grant the petition using order number 10756.
Further discussion? Commissioner Conaway, any comments?
I'm sorry. I just agree with Commissioner Gray that I would like to see the investigation of these parameters so that it makes it more viable for other companies to locate. So I will vote yes.
You don't have to make a comment, but if you want to, you can.
I don't have
Okay.
to vote for.
Okay. On the motion, Commissioner Conaway,
Aye.
Commissioner Correa,
Aye.
Commissioner Drexler,
Aye.
Commissioner Gray.
Aye.
I vote aye. Now, I want to say that I thought that the presentations made today and the documents filed in this case were really very good and thoughtful. Really, it's been a struggle. And I think the real problem is we haven't quite captured a good, efficient rule. And I think that the fact that staff is working on that is obviously a recognition of that. Not that it's in any way any blame to be put on staff, but it's just a very difficult technical area. And we want to encourage the CEFs because it might be that we'll be sort of the lone wolf in that area in the immediate future. So I'm looking forward to seeing what the results of the new staff workshop is on this issue. And it just seems like to me that it's the lack of flexibility in the present rule. You know, if it's, you know, it's just the lack of friendship, so to speak, with entrepreneurship. I mean, we need to have rules that are workable, rules that are efficient, rules that make it cheaper for our constituents to get power, which is clean. And I'm not sure that denying a waiver under these circumstances is any way in the furtherance of those goals, which is why I voted yes. Okay, I think we better get on to the next matter. Thank you all very much for your attendance.
Thank you.
And I'm sure we'll see a lot of waiver requests in the future, unfortunately. Okay, let's see if I can get back to where we're supposed to be, which is number 3, I believe, on the regular agenda. In the matter of the application of Tidewater Utilities, Inc. for a general increase in rates. And we have Ms. Scott, who's been patiently waiting for us, as well as Mr. Murphy. Ms. Scott, you want to proceed, please?
Chair Winslow and Commissioners, Pam Scott here on behalf of Tidewater Utilities, Inc. I also have with me Bruce Patrick, who is the president of Tidewater Utilities, Inc. I'm here happy to report that all the parties in this docket have reached agreement to settle the matter. And in that regard, I'd like to thank staff and DPA for efficiently and effectively working through the issues so that we could get to this point today. At your last meeting on June 18th, you approved a joint motion revoking the designation of the hearing examiner in this matter so that we could present this settlement directly to the commissioners. As you are aware, 26 Delaware Code Section 512 encourages the resolution of matters through settlements and authorizes the commission to approve such settlements where the commission finds that the settlement is in the public interest. The parties have stipulated to the exhibit log, which contains exhibits 1 through 26, which has been filed in Delafile, and I would ask that those exhibits be submitted into evidence.
Not hearing any objections. They are admitted without objection.
Thank you. At this time, I would like to call Mr. Patrick to walk through some testimony regarding the settlement, and I ask that he be sworn. Thank you. Can you please state your full name for the record?
Sure. Bruce, middle initial E, last name Patrick.
And by whom are you employed?
I'm employed by Tidewater Utilities,
In what capacity?
president.
And how long have you been in that role?
I've been with Tidewater a little over 23 years, and in this role, a little over a year and a half.
And did you assist in the preparation of the application for this docket that we are here for today?
Yes, I did.
And in that regard, did you prepare pre-filed testimony in this docket identified on the exhibit log as exhibit number 3?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes or corrections to that testimony?
No.
If I were to ask you the same questions today as set forth in your testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
As the representative for Tidewater in this settlement proceeding, do you adopt the testimony of the other Tidewater witnesses who filed testimony on behalf of Tidewater, which are shown in the exhibit log as exhibits 4 through 8?
Yes.
Did you also participate on behalf of Tidewater in the settlement conversations with staff and DPA?
Yes, I did.
Can you provide a summary of the key features of the settlement that the parties have agreed to?
Sure. Yes. The revenue requirement increase is $5.5 million versus the $10.33 million originally requested. A 9.5% return on equity versus the current 9.6% return on equity, and a common equity ratio of 53.5%. Agreement on the true-up refund for excess deferred income tax, EDIT. The EDIT will be refunded as a surcredit on monthly customer bills over the next 6 months for a total of $1,142,995, with an annual amortization and corresponding refunds of the remaining balance of $3,211,587 to be made over the next 24 years in the amount of $133,816 per year. For legacy Tidewater customer, there will be a slight increase in the fixed customer service charge of $17.11 to $18, and that's for your 5/8 inch to 3/4 inch meters, and then corresponding increases for the other meter sizes. And for accounting purposes, Tidewater is to maintain its current depreciation rate. We'll use a 3-year amortization rate for rate case expenses and a 10-year amortization for tank paintings.
Was the settlement agreement the result of an arm's length transaction amongst the parties?
Yes, the settlement agreement was a product of lengthy and good faith negotiations amongst the parties, and it represents a fair result for Tidewater and its customers. The settlement also avoids a costly litigation.
And in your opinion, is this settlement in the public interest?
Yes, the settlement reflects a compromise on several issues that were negotiated and in good faith with both staff and DPA. In that regard, the terms of the settlement should be considered as a whole and not as individual parts. As a result of the settlement, significant customer benefits will be realized, including but not limited to infrastructure investment as needed to improve service, and a very slight increase in the fixed customer charge, and also the resolution of the refund customers that are associated with EDIT.
I don't have any further questions for Mr. Patrick. He is available.
Thank you. Any questions, council?
Staff has no questions.
The Division of the Public Advocate has no questions.
Any other witnesses?
My question is, what size meter do most people have in their homes?
Most people have 5/8 inch meters. That's the super majority, 99% probably.
I have a well, so I don't know. Thank you.
Yeah, almost all.
Yes, we have Ms. Workman now, please.
Yes, for staff has one witness they'd like to call, Miss Ara Azad, and we would ask that she be sworn in.
Good afternoon. Ara Azad here for staff.
I don't think she can hear you. Can you snag a mic?
Azad,
Yes,
you swear that the testimony you're about to give should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
yes.
Thank you. Please state your name and business address for the record.
Ara Azad, 11614 Tomahawk Creek Parkway, Suite I, Leawood, Kansas, 66211.
By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I am employed by AZP Consulting, LLC. I'm managing partner at AZP, where I oversee the firm's projects, including directing the technical analysis and developing an expert testimony on regulatory accounting and finance.
Can you please describe your role and responsibilities in this docket?
Yes. AZP was engaged by the staff of the Delaware Public Service Commission to review Tidewater's application for an increase in base rates and to sponsor testimony on behalf of commission staff.
What information did you review during this engagement?
I reviewed the company's file testimony and schedules, as well as discovery responses related to AZP's analysis of Tidewater's revenue requirement, expenses, revenues, and rate base. I also examined the company's proposed cost of service and rate design. AZP also conducted a comprehensive analysis of Tidewater's cost of capital and developed staff's recommended fair rate of return for the company in the rate case on behalf of staff. I also performed a detailed analysis of Tidewater's excess deferred income tax accounting for a recommendation on the requisite accounting for compliance with Commission Order number 10018 in docket number 210247, and quantified the implications of compliance with that order on Tidewater's revenue requirement and resulting rates in the current docket.
Did you file testimony on behalf of Commission staff in this docket on March 26th and April 22nd, 2025, with recommendations relating to the areas of your analysis?
Yes.
And have your testimonies been marked and entered into the record of this proceeding as exhibits number 16 and 17?
Yes, they have.
Was any other testimony filed on behalf of staff for this docket?
Yes. Ms. Lisa Driggins, Commission Staff Regulatory Policy Administrator, provided testimony on background information on Tidewater's application, overview of the rate case proceeding, and summary of the testimonies filed by staff's witnesses. Ms. Isla Causey, Commission Staff Public Utility Analyst, provided testimony on the company's purchased water, chemical, purchased power, and tank painting expenses. And Mr. Brian Geller, also a Commission Staff Public Utility Analyst, provided testimony on Tidewater's proposed tariff changes.
Have the testimonies filed by Ms. Causey, Mr. Geller, and Ms. Driggins been marked and entered into the record of this proceeding as exhibits numbers 13, 14, and 15 and 18, respectively?
Yes.
Has a settlement agreement been reached in this case?
Yes.
Can you briefly describe the terms of the settlement agreement?
The settlement agreement resolves the company's request for a base rate change with an increase of $5.5 million to Tidewater's revenues. This is based on a return on common equity, or ROE, of 9.50% and an imputed capital structure that consists of 53.50% common equity.
What rate of return did you recommend for Tidewater in your direct testimony?
I recommended an overall rate of return of 6.99% in my direct testimony. That was based on a capital structure consisting of 52.62% common equity and an ROE of 9.48%.
Do you believe the return on common equity and capital structure stipulated in the settlement agreement are reasonable?
Yes, I do.
What was the change in revenues you recommended for Tidewater in your direct testimony?
I had recommended a revenue increase of $4.3 million in my direct testimony.
Do you believe that the $5.5 million revenue increase stipulated in the settlement agreement is reasonable?
Yes.
Could you please explain why you believe a revenue increase of $5.5 million is reasonable given staff's recommended position in the pre-filed testimony?
The $5.5 million revenue increase represents a mutual compromise by all of the parties. Tidewater, the Division of the Public Advocate, and Commission staff all considered a number of issues that the Commission would have contemplated and ruled on, and we all came together with a proposed overall resolution. A number of the issues that we contemplated in the course of settlement inherently require evaluative judgment because they result from consideration of various positions on a spectrum within a range of reasonableness. For example, the capital structure used in rate-making calculus that AZP had recommended was based on an imputed hypothetical capital structure that lowered the company's actual common equity ratio. We developed this based on a range of reasonable common equity ratios compared to other similar companies. The capital structure stipulated in the settlement agreement utilizes a common equity ratio that's slightly lower than the company's actual and slightly higher than AZP's recommended ratio. Similar concessions were considered by the parties in other areas of accounting relative to each of the filed positions. Another set of considerations in the course of settlement was the impact of test period expenses that became known and measurable and rate base that became used and useful subsequent to the analysis underlying staff's direct testimony. So the revenue increase total that's reflected in the settlement agreement accounts for additional infrastructure investments and actual expenses that Tidewater incurred after we had completed the analysis underlying AZP's direct testimony.
Can you summarize the EDIT analysis in your testimony?
Yes. For context, the excess deferred income taxes, or EDIT, came into existence as a result of the 2017 Tax Act, which, among other things, reduced corporate income taxes from 35% to 21%. The Commission established docket number 171240 to ensure that ratepayers received the full benefit of that change. At the request of the Commission, staff AZP conducted an audit of Delaware Utilities EDIT work papers in 2020. In order number 9166, paragraph 3 in that docket, the Commission stated that should the Commission determine that a utility's rates required reduction as a result of the Commission's review, that the Commission would open a new docket for each such utility. Docket number 210247 was open for Tidewater for that purpose. In docket number 210247, order number 10018, the Commission approved annual amortization and refund for EDIT for Tidewater's ratepayers at a rate of $67,794 per year, subject to additional refund with interest of any underpayment should it be determined in the company's next rate case that that amount should have been higher. The company's next rate case is the current docket, which is 240991. AZP reviewed Tidewater's current balances for EDIT and the related accounts, which include the regulatory liability that was established in docket number 171240, as well as the annual amortization of those balances and the rate benefits to customers that have been reflected in rates to date. The details of my recommended calculations and all the reasoning are outlined in my April 22nd supplemental testimony.
What was the resulting rate impact of the EDIT accounting you recommended in your testimony?
Based on the analysis that I described, I recommended a one-time customer bill credit totaling approximately $1.1 million, in addition to annual amortization, which is the customer credit, of the remaining regulatory liability balance based on AZP's analysis of the company's excess deferred income taxes that resulted from the 2017 Tax Act.
How is the EDIT customer refund and related accounting recommended in your pre-filed testimony incorporated into the proposed settlement?
The parties have agreed that Tidewater will provide approximately $1.1 million bill credit to ratepayers through a surcredit on customer bills over a period of 6 months to be credited to customers through the end of 2025. In addition, Tidewater will continue to amortize or return to customers on an annual basis approximately $134,000 of its remaining EDIT regulatory liability balance over the next 24 years.
Do you believe the EDIT accounting stipulated in the proposed settlement is reasonable?
I do.
Does this conclude your testimony?
Yes.
Thank you, Mrs. Odd. Mrs. Odd is now available for cross-examination.
I have no questions. Chair Winslow.
No questions.
Staff has no further witnesses. Thank you.
Mr. Crumpler? Or is it going to be Mr. Murphy? Excuse me, Mr. Murphy.
That's quite all right. Mr. Murphy for the Division of the Public Advocate. We have one witness. It's Glenn Watkins, and I ask that he be sworn.
Mr. Watkins, swear that the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please state your name and business address.
Yes, my name is Glenn A. Watkins. My business address is 6377 Matawan Trail, Mattawan, Mechanicsville, Virginia, 23116.
By whom are you employed?
Technical Associates Incorporated.
And what is your position at Technical Associates?
I'm president and senior economist.
What is your educational background?
I hold an MBA and a BS in economics from Virginia Commonwealth University.
What professional organizations do you belong to, and what certifications do you hold?
I'm a member of several professional organizations that are included in my vita attached to my testimony, and I'm also a certified rate of return analyst with the Society of Utility and Regulatory Financial Analysts.
Mr. Murphy, Mr. Watkins has been noticed by this commission on multiple occasions as an expert and been qualified to testify. So we recognize you as an expert and we miss you.
Likewise, it's good to be at my second home again, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Mr. Watkins did try to talk me out of some of those questions.
I told you, Frank.
What was your role in this proceeding?
I was retained by the DPA to investigate all aspects of this proceeding with the exception of cost of capital issues. In other words, revenue requirement, cost of service, and rate design.
Did you submit pre-filed direct testimony in this proceeding?
I did, and I believe it was on March 26th of this year.
If I were to ask you the same questions today, would your answers and your pre-filed testimony be the same?
They would.
Did the Division of the Public Advocate reach a settlement with Tidewater in this case?
Yes, we did.
Did you participate in the settlement negotiations related to the proposed settlement agreement?
Yes, throughout the entire course.
Could you briefly describe the terms of the settlement as they pertain to revenue requirements?
Certainly. And not to be overly redundant with Mr. Patrick, the agreed upon revenue requirement increase is $5.5 million, which with the exception of a few issues, the settlement agreement with respect to revenue requirement is a black box. However, in this regard, the $5.5 million increase reflects the roll-in of approximately $1.7 million of DSIC costs that customers are currently paying. Therefore, the net increase that the customers will realize as a result of this settlement is about $3.8 million annually. Of specific relevance to the company's revenue requirement, the settlement provides for a 9.5 return on equity and a capital structure of 46.5% long-term debt, 53.5% common equity. In addition, both Mr. Patrick and Ms. Ara went over the return of EDIT as well as the CER credit as well as the future amortization of about $1.14 million CER credit over the next 6 months. With respect to class revenue increases, the settlement agreement assigns an equal percentage increase to all legacy meter classes, such that public and private fire protection services receive no increases, which is consistent with the company's and my litigation positions. And again, the fixed monthly customer charge was increased slightly from the current rate of $17.11 to $18 for 5/8 and 3/4 inch meters. And as you just heard, that's 99% of the customers. There's a few large customers, but not many. And this $18 customer charge compares with the company's as filed request of $19.36. So I believe that hits the high points, Counselor.
In your opinion, is the settlement in the public interest, and if so, why?
Yes, in my opinion, it definitely is in the public interest. In large part, it should be remembered that this is Tidewater's first true general rate case in about 10 years. During this period, the company's operating costs have increased simply due to inflation and other factors. And furthermore, over the last 10 years, the company's investment in plant has increased significantly. Now, while the DPA, as the consumer advocate, would have preferred a lower revenue requirement, the settlement revenue increase is about half of what was requested by the company in its initial filing.
Without getting into the details of the confidential settlement negotiations, Please explain why the Division of the Public Advocate agreed to the overall settlement increase that is contained in the settlement agreement, which is materially larger than what you recommended in your pre-filed direct testimony.
Certainly. Well, in general, DPA evaluates every case, including this case, by looking at the litigation positions, our litigation positions in concert with the litigation risk if the case went to full hearing and in a fully litigated case. That is, DPA had to gauge how the commission would likely rule on the DPA's proposed adjustments, and then we judgmentally go from there. In this regard, however, there are a couple of overarching reasons why the proposed $5.5 million settlement increase is larger than what is contained in my direct testimony, wherein I had recommended a $3.04 million increase. At the time of my pre-filed testimony, we only had data for 9 months actual and 3 months forecasted. In other words, we had actual data only through December of 2024, whereas the test period ends March of 2025. When I filed my direct testimony, that was my testimony was based on actual plant amounts actually in service as of December 2024. However, subsequent to the filing of my direct testimony, the company provided its 12+0 update through March 2025. And indeed, as a result of using actual test period amounts, the company's actual rate base increased by more than $12 million from what was in service in December, which is a very substantial amount. Similarly, actual allowed expenses increased by about $1.5 million from those actual amounts incurred through December 2024. So those two factors had a huge impact on DPA's evaluation of what is fair and reasonable and how we would negotiate with the company. But we certainly took those two major factors into consideration.
And you do understand that the commission staff also agrees with the settlement, correct?
Yes, I do.
Do you have any concluding comments regarding the proposed settlement agreement as it relates to the proposed $5.5 million increase?
Yes, of course, none of the settling parties received everything they wanted in this case. And furthermore, the settlement is the sum of its parts, and they all go together. In other words, one cannot remove or change one aspect of the revenue requirement because the entire settlement is a package and, as indicated earlier, largely a black box.
Commissioners, Mr. Watkins is available for cross-examination.
Scott?
I don't have any cross, thank you.
Workman?
Staff has no cross. Thank you.
One quick question, a curious question. What was the driver of the 12 million increase from December to March?
That's a great question, Commissioner. In my pre-filed testimony, even though the company had forecasted those an additional, I believe it was 14 million, but anyway, pretty darn close to the 12 million. I looked at that with a jaundiced eye because, you know, here we are in the winter season, January, February, March, and I said, good gracious, how are you going to spend $12 million in the wintertime? And in informal discussions I had on that very topic with the company, after they proved to me that, in fact, they did spend that $12 million, she said, Glenn, it's not rocket science. When we put together our rate case, we knew that the way our budgeting and construction process was, we were going to spend those money in those 3 winter months, and sure enough, we did. So I was as surprised as you, Commissioner, but in fact, they truly did complete those projects, and they're in service as we speak.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Crumpler? Mr. Murphy? No, Mr. Crumpler.
I have no questions. Mr. Murphy, do you have any further questions?
Nothing further. All right.
Commissioners?
So I moved, so I move that we um, accept the order number, we approve the order number 10768.
Second the motion?
Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, Commissioner Conaway,
Aye.
Commissioner Korea,
Aye.
Mr. Drexler,
Aye.
Mr. Gray.
Aye.
I vote aye. The motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Patrick.
Thank you.
Scott,
Yeah,
thank you,
thank very
everyone.
much.
And we're going into Mr. Hardigan's comments.
Thank you, Chairman Winslow. I just wanted to recognize a new employee, Andrew Brown. Andrew is joining us this week, and he will be a pipeline safety inspector along with Chavis Bianco. And
Welcome, welcome.
get him trained up and out in the streets as soon as we can. Other than that, our next meeting,
Tell me he's going underground yet?
our next meeting is July 23rd.
Anything else, anybody? Okay, thank you all. We're adjourned.
Have a safe and happy holiday.